This video is for the Second Chance Conference in Toronto, Canada. I'm interviewing Professor Aaron Thomas Kinzel about prisoner reentry. Tell me about some of your work here at WMU.
Okay, hi Claire. I'm working at Western Michigan University for the Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice. This will be my third year at the university, and I teach primarily courses that have to do with juvenile delinquency, intro to criminal justice, methods of sociology, such as that. Basically, reentry is a process within the criminal justice system where people who are convicted of crimes are eventually brought home and the reintegration process for them to come back into society.
You're a graduate student at University of Michigan. Tell me about your studies.
Okay, so I'm working on my doctorate at U of M right now. I'm a predoctoral candidate in education. My dissertation research has to do with prisoner education, and I'm looking at different programming to work with offenders in the system, particularly youth and adults, and find mechanisms for them to come home and be a positive part of society. How do they reacclimate back into society and become productive citizens? So what are some of the things that are evidence-based practices in which they can, avoid criminal behavior? So there's behavioral modification there, there's access to resources, there's problems with lack of education in which we need to remediate these problems in order for people to move forward and become successful within our communities.
Okay, I understand you're the owner of a small business. What kind of business is it, and how does it tie in with your interest in reentry?
Okay, I have a small consulting firm with my grandfather. It's called Medal of Honor Consulting. And basically what we do is we focus on several areas for our consulting work, one of which is criminal justice and prisoner reentry. I go out into the community and I work with government, nonprofit, and private organizations in the programs in which they serve offenders coming home, and also different training aspects. Like I recently did some work with the Federal Bureau of Prisons in which I did a training seminar for high-level executive administrators, prison wardens, local county sheriffs, that all came together, and I discussed aspects of things and programming that are needed in facilities to not only maintain order within the correctional facility, but also to create cohesion upon release for the people that are confined in these facilities. So that is most of my work in that capacity. I do consulting on an organizational level as well, looking at needs assessments for organizations and what are some of the things that they can use to build upon their capacity, and also expand for different types of reentry programs, particularly with a focus on higher education. I think that's one of the biggest needs for our reentry population is access to higher education. What do I mean by that? I mean, the first step, obviously, is to either get a GED, which is a general equivalency diploma, or a high school diploma, and then prepare for vocational training. I think is one of the best options for people who come out of facilities, because vocational training gives them the skills and the opportunity to rejoin the workforce with little restriction. People that are doing construction work, such as roofing, heating and cooling, and stuff like that, there's very limited barriers to get into that market to do simple construction work. And then the next step, I think, has to do with business and entrepreneurship. So I look at pushing programs like that and assisting different organizations in developing those programs.
Why are you interested in prisoner reentry?
Okay, my interest in prisoner reentry is kind of a long story. So I mentioned several different stages that I'm working on for my professional and academic development. But a lot of my passion for prisoner reentry comes from the fact that I actually came from a crime-ridden neighborhood as a child. I grew up in southeastern Michigan, in which some of my family members were committing crimes, and I'm not talking about like small-scale stuff. I'm talking about very high-level, very highly organized criminal activity, selling narcotics, connections to drug cartels out near California. This is stuff as a child I seen, and eventually, as I grew older, became developing on to become a better criminal and to just become a criminal in the beginning. I I look back now in time and how crazy some of my life as a child was, seeing these types of things, environment has a huge impact on people. I took a total accountability for some of my actions, but the fact that I was in this really horrific environment and shaped by family members and parents who are actively engaged in criminal activity, I think it was a huge detriment to my life and just my upbringing. So as a child, I started transitioning through the process, watching my parents become more and more sophisticated in the criminal enterprise and becoming more actively involved as a child in this whole setup. And my studies in school were very lacking because of this. Teachers had no idea how to really deal with me because of my behavioral issues. I have something called a God complex that I call, to where as a child, no one really told me what to do. I was never punished. I didn't have a normal family structure. So as a child in the public school system, I had teachers and administrators trying to direct me to do work and to do certain things, and I would basically just be defiant and not do what I was supposed to do. And I don't really fault the teachers or the administrators. They just had no clue how to deal with someone like me with a behavioral issue. So one thing that I think that is really necessary in a reformation standpoint is that we need to have our teachers more able to understand kids with these behavioral issues and stop putting the special education label on all kids that have difficulties. So, we need teachers to be versed in social work. We need them to be versed in psychological, behavioral curriculum to help them better understand the needs of kids like myself who are just having really rough lifestyles at home, and then I'm bringing that into the classroom and disrupting the classroom and disrupting the entire environment of the school system. So that's something I think that was necessary. And then as I progressed through school, not going to school because of all the problems I had at home, that just really destroyed a lot of my early childhood development. So as a teenager, I started getting more and more deeply involved in the criminal activity with my family members and much further and further removed from the public school system. So each track was basically leading me in the same way in what we call here in America the school to prison pipeline. So I was not engaging in normal activities. My mentors were criminals, convicts, prostitutes, drug addicts. Those were the people that I seen in the community who I idolized, and that was the type of behavior that I legitimized and also was drawn to in my network. So I started becoming heavily engaged in substance abuse, and that just was one more compounding factor that just kind of destroyed my life. And as I began to sell more drugs and more weapons and stuff like that in the communities, I started to see the devastation that was starting to happen. And yet I still kept going forward with these activities. I think around the age of 14, 15, I was at a school basketball game, and 2 police officers had stopped me because I was smoking marijuana, or they thought I was smoking marijuana, which I was. And I got into a violent confrontation with 2 police officers over, arguing about because I smelled like pot. I was just so defiant and had no concept of authority or rules. Basically, my life was a free-for-all. My family, the only time that I received any type of a punishment per se for activity was when I wasn't selling dope or I wasn't doing what was expected of me in the criminal enterprise. Not for me, like doing something that's wrong for stealing or anything like that. It was because I wasn't being a productive member of the criminal enterprise. So that just gave me this more really screwed up mentality, and it just kept funneling me back towards that whole school prison pipeline thing. So at 16, I dropped out of high school, and I just pretty much invested myself entirely in the criminal enterprises that my family was engaged in. I became more sophisticated as a criminal, and I began to actually, at 16 years old, have adults working for me to run drugs and guns throughout southeastern Michigan. And again, that reemphasized this notion of power for me, this control, to where I could basically do whatever the hell I wanted to do at any time and got away with it. So I really felt untouchable, and a year or 2 later, I got more deeply immersed in substance abuse. I started getting suicidal from using like so much cocaine, LSD, methamphetamine. I mean, you name it, I've done it. And I just was really getting tired of all this stuff. My family had shifted away from the criminal enterprise, and they all became drug addicts, particularly with crack cocaine. And instead of selling drugs now and running the narcotic enterprise that they previously had, they were just robbing like poor people to get by to support their own habit. And I really wasn't cool with that. And I just started to kind of like distance myself from them slowly because I just did not like what was going on. To shift forward a little bit, at the age of 18, I went out east trying to get away from family members. I was still abusing drugs heavily at that time. And I'm going to tell you something now, which was kind of like the pivotal moment that really changed my life, and it's kind of scary. I got pulled over by a state trooper at the age of 18, and during that traffic stop, I pulled a firearm on a state trooper. And I fired off one shot out the window as he approached the vehicle. I did not strike the officer. He returned fire upon me. He fell back. Another officer was at the scene, and he fired 15 rounds from a 9mm Beretta in the back of that car. And to try to like premise that and describe that, it was like a war zone. It was just an explosion of bullets. It's like something you would see like in The Matrix or something, or some Hollywood film. Bullets were just flying through the car, and I was kind of like frozen in time. And I don't say this to be macho or anything, I wasn't scared, I was just so whacked out as a child, like I didn't even comprehend what it is I had just done, or there was no fear. I actually had my girlfriend with me at that time, and she was just scared to death, and rightfully so. No one somehow was injured. I did not injure either officer, and myself and my girlfriend were not injured either, which is just some miraculous event, and I don't even believe in God, but something happened that day to where bullets passed through that seat, and forensic specialists later checked that vehicle and have no clue how these bullets like went through the back of my seat, through into the dash, the radio, right by the gas tank, and 16 bullets total. And somehow I'm here today. So I don't know what happened, but it's definitely a pivotal moment changing. So fast tracking from there, I took off, high-speed chase with my girlfriend. We went out in the woods. We were in Maine. We were near the border of Canada. We jumped out, exited the vehicle. We were hiding in the woods for approximately a day. They had over 100 military personnel searching for me and my girlfriend, and all kinds of local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. It was just a mess. I mean, I go back and I really do feel sorry, and people really don't necessarily believe that, but I am remorseful for my actions. I mean, I could have killed someone that day. And not just I could have killed someone, but I could have got my girlfriend killed or got myself killed for these foolish actions. But as a child, again, backtracking now, that is what drove up to that moment. Some of these environmental impacts and this God complex I created, and then just this progression of detriment for me, building upon just negative behaviors, and eventually the culmination was this event. So the following day, we were finally captured without incident, and hence became my new journey in a state prison. I was convicted at the courts for a 19-year sentence for the attempted murder of a police officer, and I ended up serving approximately 10 years straight. So from the age of 18 to 28, I was locked up in the penitentiary. During that journey is where I think I learned a lot about myself, a lot about what some of the things that I did and the wrongfulness of my behaviors, and more so the ripple effect. So like, selling drugs or selling guns in the community, I now see like the ripple effect of how that goes out and affects other people in the community and just devastates communities. So I was still kind of aggressive in the penitentiary, but I started learning from some of the older convicts about law, public policy, and education. And through like this peer learning system, I started to develop myself towards a positive track. It took quite a few years for me to really change in the system, because there's a very often a lack of programming in systems. I had a decent system where I had access to some substance abuse, anger management, and stuff of that nature, but really most of it was really placed upon myself. And so I reached out from a positive angle to really improve myself and move forward. So, long-ended.
How does the reentry process work upon release for convicted felons?
Okay, that's a really difficult one too. So I got out, I think in 2007, Again, so nearly 10 years in the penitentiary, my whole environment was basically criminals, convicts, prison. That's my whole notion of society as a world. So pretty skewed and disrupted version for that age range. So I got out, I'm 28 years old, I have no job skills, I have multiple felony convictions, and I really had no clue what to do. Certainly before my release, I got convinced to enroll in a community college. I think that was one of the biggest impacts that changed my life around for the better. I had many barriers in which that I couldn't even get housing because I was a convicted felon. So something that we have for reentry here in the United States that's a really big problem is something called collateral consequences of conviction. Basically what this is legal policy that has absolutely nothing to do with your sentencing guidelines or what a judge decides for you to be given because of your bad behavior. But these are just legal policy guidelines that for people who return home, they're restricted from housing, for getting government housing. It's really hard for them to even, I was trying to rent a private place, and the fact that my criminal record kept coming up, it barred me from finding legitimate housing. Fortunately, my family, particularly my grandparents who were never involved in criminal activity, co-signed for me and allowed me to get that opportunity so I could just live somewhere, which I think is one of the biggest steps in transition moving forward. So I go into community college, I do really well for myself, and now I have these new mentors. I have these new people in this new social network that I'm surrounded by college students, by working professionals, by faculty members who are experts in whatever it may be. One of my most interesting courses I took was a French foreign language course, and this professor was also the dean of this college, and I began to discuss with him, some aspects of my background, and he became a mentor for me for like the last 6 to 7 years straight, and he has been really pivotal in a lot of my changes as well. So I think positive mentorship and engaging in a new environment, in a positive environment, I think is extremely important for reentry efforts. So for myself, I got my associate's degree after like 2 years with honors. I transitioned into a private 4-year university. I got my bachelor's degree in less than a year after that. After that, I transitioned to the University of Michigan, went for a master's degree in public administration and public policy. I got that in like another year and a half. And now I'm currently in a doctoral program. I've been in that for a couple years, working on my dissertation here shortly in the next few months. So this entire track of education, I don't encourage a lot of people coming out of the system to jump into like some of the track that I'm going to. I think they should stop more at the vocational in the community college and then do entrepreneurship and stuff like that to get them acclimated back to society and open opportunities. Because even now with a graduate degree from the University of Michigan, which is one of the best universities we have in the U.S., I struggle to find employment because of something where employment practices where you have to very often tell employers that you have a criminal record. It's something called checking the box. Basically, it just asks a simple question: have you ever been convicted of a felony crime? And I check yes 9 times. I mean, so it's been proven statistically that a vast majority of employers do criminal background checks, and even when they see that little check box, I mean, there's a stigma behind people with a criminal record. So that's another problem with reentry efforts. When you don't really have a legitimate opportunity to even find employment, that is a barrier for you. Another barrier I would say that is extremely destructive for people trying to make their lives better is aspects of like preclusion from social welfare programs. A lot of people cannot get social welfare because of convictions. If you got found guilty of a narcotics charge while receiving federal financial aid, you are then barred from receiving federal financial aid again. There's so many collateral consequences that just inhibit people from moving forward. And it's just tough. People really need opportunities. I think that is one of the most important things is that we need to look at for reentry efforts is giving people an opportunity to help themselves. Because if you have someone like myself, I was violent as a teenager. I had lots of violent tendencies. I committed violent acts. Now, think about that. Now, if I came out and did no educational rehabilitation, I didn't put myself in positive networks, I didn't try to do better with myself, I would probably still be in that same type of mentality. So my question that I pose to a lot of these people that are so this tough on crime movement is that who do you want moving next to you upon their release? And the fact is, in the United States, roughly 95% of the people that are in the penitentiary right now are eventually coming home. So that means pretty much all of them. So who do you want moving next to you? Do you want the person who has absolutely no job skills, is barred from employment, from housing, from social welfare, for anything to just get their basic needs met? Or do you want someone who has some opportunities, equal opportunities? I'm not saying this, let's create this Hub of Love program where we should just coddle offenders coming out of the system, but we need to give them access to resources and legitimate access, because otherwise they're going to revert back to their previous behaviors. I mean, that's just common sense stuff. So another big problem with reentry has to do with recidivism. Recidivism is basically the returning to prison after release for either committing a new crime or being violated for some technical violation. So our U.S. Department of Justice has a couple big studies out. So they define overall recidivism as returning to prison within a 3-year period. And statistics say back in '94, I believe, that 2 out of 3 come back. So 3 people go out, released from the penitentiary, 2 go back. More recent study, just last year was released. Now the numbers are staggering. 4 people get out, 3 go back. So basically people are just cycled back in and out of the system. Why? Because of all these restrictions and all these barriers. And it's not that people are just crazy and just hardcore criminals. A lot of times they revert back to these behaviors because they don't have much other options.
Moving forward, what are some policy recommendations for reentry?
Okay. Some of the biggest things, like I was just talking about, so checking the box, I think. So in Michigan and other states, nationally in the U.S. as well, we have something called ban the box legislation, which has to do with removing the felony checkbox upon job applications for initial interviews. So what does that mean? It means basically that it doesn't take away the right of an employer to ask about criminal convictions, but the initial job application, which is the screening process to pull people in, upon what it is they have for skills, knowledge, skills, and abilities. So someone like myself, I got a grad degree from U of M. I put my resume out. I don't check the box. Someone sees my professional accomplishments and says, "Oh wow, this guy's got a lot of good stuff going on." I actually get a face-to-face interview with someone as opposed to my resume being shredded in a document machine because I have multiple felony convictions. So I get that face-to-face conversation to where people can see, that I'm not who I was. I'm just not that snapshot of that teenage punk kid that committed a pretty serious offense. However, I've changed, I've grown, I'm a mature adult now who's done some pretty, really powerful things. So I think that is important. I think if we have that, and then employers, if they decide to bring someone on board, then they can do a criminal background check. That's fine. And if it's legitimately like someone who was involved in Wall Street fraud, maybe they shouldn't be working at a bank. I mean, if it's really legitimately associated to the employment opportunity, then yeah, then they can say no. But it should have something to do with the actual position. Another policy change on a broad scale would be just the elimination or the reduction of collateral consequences. So stop barring people from housing because they're convicted felons. Stop reducing or eliminating social welfare access. Allow people, in the penitentiaries now, in 1994, the Violent Crime Control Act took away Pell Grants from our penitentiaries. Before that time, there were prisoners nationwide that were earning college degrees while incarcerated. In 1994, the Pell Grants were removed from facilities due to very tough on crime legislation, and that was devastating as well. So I think another policy change would be to reintroduce Pell Grant availability, and at the very least, if not Pell Grant availability, student loan availability for people in the penitentiaries, to give them that opportunity to take college courses, to better themselves inside. And a lot of the proponents of that say, well, then you're kind of like giving offenders this special thing. No, they would follow the same guidelines that anybody else in the community has to do. And it's all on income based. If there's someone that's in prison that's making $60,000, $70,000 a year from some asset that they have or business or whatever it may be, then they shouldn't get Pell Grants, or they shouldn't have certain availability for student loans. I'm fine, but a vast majority of the people in the system, they're not rich, they're poor. Rich people very rarely go to jail because they have the money to get a really good attorney, to get private investigators, yada, 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 to where they have a much better defense throughout the entire criminal justice process. So I think that's a huge aspect that needs to be looked at as well. Moving forward, I think we need to develop some type of, you've been rehabilitated after a certain while. Some states have something called a certificate of rehabilitation, in which offenders are not necessarily have their record completely wiped clean, but they are able to get jobs because they have a certificate that's state sanctioned that basically says they've conducted certain activities to better themselves, they're rehabilitated, and they should have that opportunity to be productive citizens. I'll tell you what, the people that are precluded from employment opportunities are the people that would probably be your best workers from an employer standpoint. I hire convicted felons all the time, and it's not just because I'm a convicted felon myself, it's because people, men and women, that come out of the system, most of them want to be re-engaged in society. Most of them want an opportunity to prove themselves, better themselves, to support themselves and their families. A lot of people have kids, and they get out and they can't even support their own children. I can't even explain to you how devastating that must be. I have a young daughter now, and I could not even imagine not being able to provide for my child. I still struggle at times, but I'm still able to provide for my child. If I couldn't do that, I couldn't even tell you some of the stupid stuff I'd be doing to take care of my baby. So that's a huge problem. Finally, I just think that we need a huge culture shift. That there are people that commit acts. It's kind of like that Kodak moment. People, we make mistakes, but something my great grandmother taught me before she passed when I was a child was that mistakes can be our greatest teacher. So as long as we learn from our mistakes and we move forward in a positive, different path from the mistake that we made, then mistakes are okay. That's the greatest learning process that we have. If you screw something up, then you find a way to make it right. So the culture shift needs to be that we need to give people an opportunity. We need to stop stigmatizing people and really give people this thought that nobody's redeemable out of the system. Again, using myself as an example, violent offender, youthful offender, I got out of the system, changed myself, and not only did I change myself, I work with the community. I go back into prisons very often, I go into juvenile facilities, I work with the community, I've worked with thousands of people who have records or those who are at risk of going into a facility, and I'm changing my community. I want to get that, and I'm not the only one. There's all kinds of people out here that are convicted criminals that are also doing the same thing through entrepreneurship and different marketing of themselves to improve their community. People want to make change, and who better to really guide and mentor those that are coming out of the system or who are in the system, or those like myself who've been successful. So maybe even another policy change would be allowing people like myself to get easier access to facilities. I understand there's security issues with that as well, but I've been able to go back in regardless of my record, but it's still tough. But I think we should open the door much more to where give people that have lived the life the opportunity to mentor those.